That is so creepy how that voice just comes on. It says recording in progress. All right. We're off to a great start. Welcome to the first podcast, the first Cinemind podcast. Cinemind podcast. What we're hoping that this is going to be is this is more of a unstructured, as you will soon see, kind of a freewheeling conversation in which we are going to be talking about several of the topics that we're hoping to cover in some of the future episodes. So again, this is just kind of a brainstorming session and also maybe an opportunity for folks who are listening. We would absolutely love some feedback to hear back from folks about what it is that you would like to see us cover in some of our future episodes, because you can tell we are two huge nerds, and so we do kind of get lost in the weeds on some of these topics. My name is Ron Hopkins, or RC Hopkins, as I believe I have it in the credits.
I'm Chase O'Gwyn, and I think today we're going to be talking about, I think we're largely picking up the psychology of evil and the 2021 Cruella.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's funny because we originally were talking about Cruella, or actually I think I was the one doing all the talking because I saw it and I was like, dude, you have to watch this. This is like so much better than I was thinking it was going to be. It was actually very interesting.
It was.
Yeah, I mean, I have hated the live action remakes. Well, I mean, Cruella is not a remake, but you know, it's one of those where they're just going back to they're raiding their own vault. Yep. And they're making these just awful movies. I think I made a joke about this in the Cruella, I was writing down some ideas for the script. And one of the things, I don't know if this will make it to the final cut, but one of the things, did you see Beauty and the Beast? The
live action? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. What did you think before I trash it?
So I mean, it was a play for play. It came on the curtails of Cinderella, right? Yeah. And Cinderella was well done, retelling totally new stuff. And then I thought that's what we were going to get for Beauty and the Beast. And what we got was almost a scene for scene remake, right, of the cartoon. But you can do things in a cartoon that you can't do in live action that don't boggle belief. Yeah. And the musical numbers, I mean, like they auto-tuned some people. I was like, this was.
But you could tell.
Yeah.
Emma Watson.
Yeah.
The one thing the one part I actually did love, and I think I actually memed it myself. I did a screen cap because it was just a moment that had me laughing so hard, is when she's walking through, she's singing she's basically trashing her town in that song. And when she's walking through, if you look in the background, right when she's singing about the baker, you have to see the baker is giving her this incredible stink eye in the background. And you can just see it on his face where it's like, well, up yours too, Bella. Yeah. You can see it. But
what I liked about Cruella actually was that it gave me, thinking back, was like, there's now more depth to the original 101 Dalmatians now than I had before. I was just like, I never understood why Roger hated Cruella the way he did, right? Like, well, now it makes sense, right? They actually went and gave a movie more depth for its original. Now you have to ignore the live action 101 Dalmatians because they butchered, which was, came out early before Disney was really into vault rating.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the original animation, we now understand, both Anita and Roger's motivation differently, right? Yeah. And what they think Cruella is capable, and why Roger is a little bit worried about her wanting to buy the puppies, right? It was like, there was this hint that maybe she might just skin the puppies because maybe she might have already done that, right? So
I did love that they actually played around with it. I mean, you and I know watching this that there's no way she skinned the puppies. But yeah. I think what was interesting is the movie doesn't even try to fool the audience with it. The movie's more interested in whether or not the characters around her believed it was something that she could do, which again, it's just one of those things about the movie that really surprised me, in that it felt like it was actually treating the audience like adults, that there was like a little bit of subtlety to it. I did really, really love the fact that I think I said this before, saying you have this movie where, well, let me back up again. there have been a lot of movies lately that have been very, I'm going to say capital F feminist. And you know me, I'm not against that. But the problem is when you have hack screenwriters who are taking up taking up feminism. It's usually white dudes. I mean, it's usually dudes doing it and taking it up in it's taken up in this almost very insulting way. And as a result, you're getting these really terrible movies. Whereas some of these, don't even get me started on that. I think that movie kind of ended my love affair with Angelina Jolie. Love affair from afar, of course. But they're actually approaching a smart way. You heard me ranting about how much I hated the Charlie's Angels remake. And there was so much I could say about that one, where it was taking up the cause of feminism in such a way that was it was just a cartoonish, insulting. And this is not me. This is actually another critic. And I thought this was a very good point. Whereas he said, the problem with it is you had these female characters that were drawn in such a way so that they all kind of blended together, so they didn't have separate identities. And as a result, it's kind of interesting how this movie that's supposed to be about female empowerment actually turns around and does almost the exact antithesis. It says that all women are alike, all women have the same powers, you know what I mean? It's like you could not tell the difference.
It erases individuality.
Exactly. Whereas like the first Charlie's Angels, which is by no means a masterpiece, the last time I saw I see you smiling. The last time I saw that film was it's been at least a decade. I mean, it's been forever. But the funny thing is, after watching the remake, I realized that the first Charlie's Angels, say what you will about it, I remembered the personalities and characters of all three of the girls. They had very distinct personalities. They felt like individuals, that there was a purpose behind them. I can remember whole scenes about it. So like I knew who they were. But 10 minutes after watching the Charlie's Angels remake, I could not for the life of me even really remember the distinctions between their characters, except for the fact that Kristen Stewart, oh, Lord bless her. I'm one of those who I like her. I do. I think she's been unfairly crapped upon, and she was trying so hard to carry that movie. I have to give her credit. I felt bad for her because she was doing everything in her power to try and save that movie. But anyway.
It was really, the star power just wasn't. I mean, and the other one had Bill Murray in it. I mean.
Yeah. I mean, and plus the weird one is that this one was so humorless. It didn't work. But back to Cruella, the thing I really liked about it is that you had these two really fascinating female characters. You have, I guess you could say two villains, but it's protagonist, antagonist, whatever.
Sure.
Now you're cheating because you're picking the two holiest Emmas, Stone and Thompson, and you're putting them. But at the same time, it's like they were fascinating. My only criticism of Cruella was that Emma Thompson's character, I felt like they made her a little too cartoonishly evil, a little bit. There were times where you could see some subtle dimensions poking through that I really wish they had followed up on. Okay, and we're back. So what I was saying was there are a few times where you start to see glimpses of some depth to Emma Thompson's character, which I wish they'd expanded upon. But yeah, that was really one of the biggest, that was only the small issue I had. Other than that, I loved it. I loved the one-upmanship between them. I love the fact that Emma Stone's character, or why am I saying Emma Stone's character? Cruella actually had a very fascinating character to her. The character was developed very well, and there was a lot going on to it.
Yeah, she becomes less one-dimensional pastiche. So rolling this back here now. So let's look at how we might look at this movie, both Emma Thompson's character and Emma Watson's characters, right? How would we look at the psychology of evil in relation to this, right? So what, this was your topic choice for how to do a Cruella. So what was it that struck you from our psychological stuff that you and I are doing in our everyday professional lives that you read into this movie?
Well, for me, it was the nature versus nurture. Because I am not as well read, or I was not as well read about the psychology of evil until I kind of went back to it. And what was interesting to me is that most of the research about the psychology of evil is really a lot of it goes back to development, which, technically, I guess that's my second master's, is technically in human development in that area of ed psych. So it was interesting to me, but it makes sense because it goes back to this idea of where is evil coming from? You will hear, if anybody's watching like a Law and Order, of course, I don't even think it's that popular as it was about 15 years ago. You remember how there was a lot of talk about the genetic markers for psychopathy? Yep. I have no idea where that literature has gone, since then. But that was what a lot of the discussion was actually looking at, saying, if somebody is raised in a particular environment, is the environment going to be the ultimate cause of what can actually happen? Right. I remember a professor in one of my clinical assessment classes who made an argument that has stayed with me. It's a simplistic argument, which even he said, but I always thought it was a great argument of saying you can have somebody who has a genetic predisposition towards, say, alcoholism. It runs in their family.
Right. Alcoholic, right?
Yeah. But if they never touch a drop of alcohol, they will never become, an alcoholic. Yep. So then it kind of goes to this idea of saying, genetics are not necessarily going to be predeterministic of whatever it is that a person's going to be. Right. But then I guess this kind of goes to, we keep brushing up against the philosophy of it, of saying, well, how is it that we define evil in this context? That's the first thing, is to say, how is it we're actually defining it?
Yeah, and it's easy to look in this movie and forget that, like, what Cruella is doing is still criminal.
Yeah.
Like, all of her acts are acts of vandalism and theft, and like, she's not a good person, even when she's not in the kind of Cruella persona, right? She is still not a good person, right? That we would typically think, but we're made to feel sympathy for her, and we kind of forget that this woman is like, if you were to have your wallet stolen by her and her crew, you'd be upset.
Yeah.
Right. It would be upsetting. And what she does, she disrupts traffic, and she disrupts people's jobs, and she, burns a warehouse down in a bad end of London. Who else might, what other buildings caught fire because of that? Right. It's all of these interesting aspects that, we it's almost like we end up having this question of like, what is justifiable evil versus non-justifiable evil. Well, it really is perspective, right? It's like, because up until this point, yes, we finally only get that, Emma Thompson's character, for spoilers, right, is who she is for Emma, right, for Cruella. And that's really like, Emma Thompson's character is a jerk. And yes, she does do that, that when she murders this woman at the beginning of the movie, and clearly she has the capacity, but up until this point, and from what you read in the film, we don't know if this is the only time she's done this.
Well,
right?
Actually, she says that, because you remember there's a point late in the movie where, now she could be exaggerating, but there's a point where Emma Stone says, "You killed my mother."
And that's right. She says, which time? You got to remind
exactly.
Me. Well, maybe it is that she is a serial killer. That's always
fun.
Yeah,
honestly, I kind of was on the fence about that one, because I'm looking at that going, yeah, that could just be basically, just trying to be a badass, trying to intimidate her. But honestly, considering how she commits the first murder at the very beginning of the movie, and the fact that she does it so very nonchalantly, and the fact that she has literally like trained her Dalmatians to kill, I'm gonna say if you're training Dalmatians to kill people, training Dalmatians to be able to like attack a person, because when you blow a whistle that you carry with you at all, it's like, you've killed people. She's definitely killed people.
And to go back to your nature and nurture argument, there are definitely genetic markers for sociopathy, right? Which is, as far as we understand in current research, right, it is a dysfunction of the mirror neurons, right, in the prefrontal cortex, which is, for those who are unfamiliar, right, is this cluster of neurons that sits about right behind the bridge of your nose in relation to like where your brain is. And they are the bits and bobs of your brain that see the world and react to the emotions that we see on other people. And it kind of helps us read the room, right? And read the emotional lay of the land.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
And it actually causes us to, our brain will say, well, it's going to tell our brain to make these kind of micro muscle movements and say, well, if my face were doing that, what I'm seeing, this is why they're called mirror neurons. We have these micro muscle movements that then mimic and say, if my face were making that shape, what emotion would I be feeling? And it seems to be that in sociopaths, in sociopathy, that this doesn't fire.
Yeah.
Right? That they can't read an emotion. You can't read the subtle ones. But what they do is they intentionally elicit large ones. So things like this is why it's easy for them to go into things like crime and other things, is because like they elicit a large reaction, and such a large emotional response on the other allows them to see what it is they're experiencing and understands like, oh, now I know what this is. This is anger. Or now I know what this is. This is fear. And that actually makes them feel alive inside when they can read it. So in many ways, like she's like what I got from that scene where after the warehouse has been burned down, right? And she's telling her, having that conversation with her dead adoptive mother, right, at the fountain. And she's like, and it turns out I'm a little bit psycho, right? Is that she's kind of woken up to sociopathy. It reminds me a lot of, the BBC version of Sherlock, right? Is that he knows how to play the game, but he's not, and Sherlock continues to play it. Whereas in Cruella, she just simply says, it's time to stop. Like I know what I'm supposed to do to be nice because that's the way the game is, but I'm not going to do it anymore. Now, it's not exact, like real life sociopathy doesn't work exactly the way it's portrayed in this film. But it is another a kind of tick to the nature side of what makes something evil.
It's interesting. I agree with you. It's really interesting because like what you just phrased was looking at like the nature part of it. Now, what I would actually say, just for the sake of conversation here, is to look at more of the nurture side of it. And to me, especially in Cruella, it would be more of a matter of justification, because now we're, of course, we're getting into, my area, because that's one of the things I've always been very fascinated with is how people will justify their actions. This goes back to, our video looking at Captain America. I mean, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. There's a huge part of it is to say, how is it that people will arrive at these justifications? Because you look at something like Cruella, and it's interesting to me how her justifications will shift depending on her understanding of what happened. Because, again, spoilers, she thinks at the very for like the first half of the movie that she was responsible indirectly for having her mother killed.
Right.
But then, so that guides her in this whole idea of like almost like wanting to become something, wanting to change, who she is. But then, as more information comes in, suddenly her plans change, and there's a radical shift in the justification for saying, I'm going to destroy this person's life because this person destroyed my mother.
Right.
This is how this person's actions. And so as a result, okay, for example, Breaking Bad to me is one of the best examples of a show that like perfectly captures how justification will lead to like evil acts or lead to these bad behaviors, because the whole show is about a character who does more and more reprehensible things, but at every step along the way, he can provide. He says it out loud. He explains it like, this is my justification for doing these things. And it's kind of ironic that you have a lot of younger people who have watched the show and they think the entire point of the show was it's cool to be a gangster, Right. I've never sounded more white than right there. But, there's a whole thing like people have these posters on the wall that will say, I am the one who knocks, which is a line from the show. Whereas when you actually watch the scene, the whole point of the scene is not that he's a badass. The whole point of the scene is that he is trying to justify his actions, and he's trying to make himself sound like he's bigger, tougher, more intimidating than he actually is. Whereas in the show, every bad thing that happens is as a result of his decisions, but he is able to clearly justify them. And to me, that's something that's always been the most fascinating part, is that you can have people. I would even go so far as to say the majority of people who commit heinous acts will have some form of justification for themselves, and it is darkly fascinating to at least hear it, to get a glimpse into how somebody can arrive at that position in which they believe that the thing that they are doing is the right thing to do. It is the moral thing to do. But really, their acts are, I would say, we could easily classify them as evil.
Sure.
Now, again, this is kind of getting more into the philosophy part of it, but this is the fascinating part of it, is looking at how the motivations play into it and how somebody can justify the acts to themselves of how they will commit it. Now, kind of jumping over, this is one of the reasons why I want to do at least one episode on the Netflix show You.
Mm-hmm.
I think I told you about this one. This is a whole movie that is It's a whole series that's stuck in this guy's head, and he's a psychopath, but he doesn't realize that. And he's stalking people. He's doing all of this stuff. He's stalking people, stalking like this one girl, and all the things that he is doing are just completely reprehensible, horrible. But you hear it in his head about how he thinks like killing somebody is a romantic gesture and all of this. Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're getting into like Wild Bill territory, right?
But that's the fascinating part of it, and that's why I think that the psychology of evil, especially when we're talking about like Cruella,
Buffalo Bill, not Wild Bill. Yeah, you know what I meant.
I was kind of wondering about that.
Wild Bill Hickok is different than Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, I think they have different uses for lotion. But yeah, I mean, I think that's, to me, I think that some of the best, most complex characters in modern film and television right now are the ones that kind of realize that, or the ones that kind of at least have that more of that understanding about the justification. Because I think the more that you have your character justifying their actions, especially if they're a villain.
You mean where the villain recognizes it, or is it that the writers recognize that?
The writers recognize it.
Yeah, I was like, because I don't think there's a lot of introspection in like Cruella's character. She's acting. It's almost like a return to instinct, right? Because as she's a kid, right, her instinct is to be aggressive and violent, etc., right? And then she suppresses it, and then
But was she aggressive?
But she was picking fights, right?
Well, no, she wasn't. Remember, because she was responding
to fights. Yeah, so I mean,
it's a subtle thing. Yeah, it's a subtle thing. Yeah, but it is an interesting. What you're highlighting is kind of interesting there, because, like, I asked my sister who watched the movie, and I just wanted her 2 cents on it, say, like, what did you think? And I hope she didn't hear this, because she's going to kill me. Because no, she had some interesting points, but she said, no, I thought that Cruella did not start off evil, that, she just became evil to circumstance around her. And when I watched the movie, I was like, it's kind of interesting, because I can see both arguments here, because the first time we're introduced to her is when her mother is trying to kind of get her under control, because she's very abrasive. Remember, that's where the name Cruella comes from, which, by the way,
right.
As much as I like the movie, that was so stupid.
Yeah.
But, she has that. But then when we see, like, the first time she's actually interacting with her peers are very hostile towards her, and therefore her reaction and response to it. I mean, again, it's like first we see a little glimpses of psychopathy or evil, in air quotes, in the nature of her, because we're being introduced to her before she's even really been in any other environment other than her home life. Then we see more of the nurture aspect, because she is interacting with her peers, and her peers are making it extremely difficult for her.
Right. Because she's the poor kid, right? That's the...
Yeah. Well, that and her hair.
Yeah. So 2 things, I guess, elephants in the room to talk about when we talk about the nature of evil are, of course, landmark psychological individuals, where we have to talk about Milgram, right? And the nature of evil, because, this and the Zimbardo experiment, right?
Yep.
Now, you and I have had these conversations in the past before, and the way we have to teach our students is that the Zimbardo experiment is essentially garbage, right? And yet, like, he is the name in psychology of evil. Matter of fact, he's got 1, maybe 2 books out.
Well, I think he's even got his own, like, documentary. There's some movie made about him. I mean, in addition to, all the ones being made about the Zimbardo experiment.
Yeah, about the experiment. Yeah, and I think it's interesting that I find more Milgram than I do Zimbardo here, right? And right, Cruella is doing what she does not because there's an authority figure telling her how to do it, but it's almost, well, and in a sense it kind of is, right? Because when she gets in for the very first time and meets, what is Emma Watson's character's name? I can't remember for the life of me.
You mean Estella?
No, not Stella. That's not Emma Watson.
You mean Emma Thompson?
Emma Thompson. Wow. We're both in Harry Potter, right? Emma Thompson's character's name, right?
Hang on. I'll look it up while you're...
So Emma Thompson's character, when she first meets her, was like, this is how...
The Baroness.
The Baroness, that's right, the Baroness.
Which isn't even really a name as a title, but go ahead.
I know, right? The Baroness is the authority figure saying, like, she's like, do I do this? She said, yes, please continue, right? You must, right? You must hurt people. And it's a kind of an ironic one because it's like it's inversed, right? So the experimentee is now being the one hurting the experimenter who's telling her, continues to tell her, yes, you must hurt people, right? The only way to get forward in life is to hurt people, right? Is to squash them, squish them, cut them down, and steal their stuff.
Yeah.
So far more in that of the Milgram's famous, shock experiment than I ever saw of Zimbardo, right? Which is Zimbardo is far more supposed to be like, this is the situation of the role, right? This is the environment puts you in these places, and you're just gonna act this way because that's what bad environments do.
I actually, this is interesting you bring this up because I would actually disagree with you. I would actually say I saw more of Zimbardo in this one.
Yeah.
Because to me, the Zimbardo experiment, not as it was supposedly supposed to run, but how it actually did run, was an example of how once you kind of set up a person in a position, you basically give them freedom, or not freedom, you empower them to be able to kind of do what they want. And if they do what they want, they're rewarded for it, which is what we see, I think, more with Cruella. Because, like, think about it. She tries to go up the right way, like in the department store, and she's shot down. Yep. But what happens, or how is it that she breaks out of that? Well, she gets drunk, she destroys another person's work, and, does her whole display, which, I mean, to be fair, her display was a lot better, but she's rewarded for that behavior. And this is what happens throughout the film is that, and it even kind of echoes, because like when Emma Thompson is basically saying, if you want to succeed in this business, you basically have to do whatever it is that you can to get ahead. You have to be ruthless and cruel. And the movie basically says, well, she's kind of right. I mean, Emma Thompson is not wrong because in this particular industry. Now, arguably, you could say that in this little corner pocket of the world, it's only this way because the Baroness has kind of made it this way. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. But you're right. That is more Zimbardo in the way it was actually affected, right? And this is why what a lot of people don't know, because it's not the way it's typically taught in Gen Psych, is that Zimbardo portrays the experiment of just being a guard in a situation where you have more power made you corrupt, made you turn to evil, right? The power corrupts absolutely all the time. What they don't know, and what came out much later in a variety of different ways by some of these experimentees coming forward, years and decades later, saying, no, we were coached, right? We were taught this is how you do it. And then you get into a kind of a Skinnerian effect, right? Where it's reinforced by, when you watch this person cower, when you have a technique that says, like, this is how you dehumanize someone, or this is how you make someone cringe or bow down to you, that's reinforcing. Yeah. And even though we know that even some of the, the people who were prisoners faked their mental breakdowns because they weren't allowed to study for the GRE while they were stuck in their prison cells. Yeah. That was one of them, the big famous one. I'm just burning up inside. He's like, look, I'm a therapist now. Looking back, I tell you, that guy was faking it.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is a whole, kind of element that goes along with it. I think just to branch off a bit, we had originally said we were going to talk about like Loki as well. I think this would be a good point to bring it up, because one of the things that was so interesting about the Loki character was his motivations to do what he did, and how, well, let me back up. I'm not explaining this well. it was always interesting because there was arguments being made that he never wanted to actually be a villain. He only became a villain because of the circumstances that he was in, and where he felt like he should be. And there is a lot. I mean, there's a lot of debate about that, because I mean, I remember some article was saying that the Avengers basically confirmed that the only reason he was a bad guy in that movie is because he was under the control of the
Mind Stone.
Was it the Mind Stone that was in the staff?
Yeah, the Mind Stone's the one in the staff.
Okay. For some reason, I was thinking it was something else. But yeah, the Mind Stone. So he was under the control of that, which there's some things to back that up. But then that doesn't explain a lot of the behaviors that goes along, especially going into the series now, because you have the scene where he is actually kind of laying out why it is that he does what he does, and that doesn't match up with it. Yeah, I don't know. I was just bringing that up because I thought to me, it was just Loki is the most interesting villain in the entire Marvel pantheon. I don't think anybody's going to argue with me about that, unless if they bring up Killmonger, and I will just go ahead and say this. Killmonger was better on paper. He was a good idea, but I did not like the way they executed him in the Black Panther movie. I did not. He had a handful of good lines, and there was a good concept. I just don't think they executed it very well.
No, Loki has definitely played as complex, and I think we owe some of that to the first Thor movie, right? Which is, I mean, you've got Kenneth Branagh, who is classic Shakespearean trained, Shakespearean director, actor. And, and if you look at Norse mythology, like Loki is a troublemaker, but he's also still Thor's brother. And, he is a bad guy, but like all pantheon gods, no one's really great, right? None of these guys are upstanding.
I think the Sandman series, I think Neil Gaiman is one of the only guys who has actually perfectly captured Thor and Loki the way that they're supposed to be in his book, where Thor was basically kind of is himbo still a word we use?
Yeah,
but I mean, he was basically kind of a bro, kind of a jockey bro type. Matter of fact, there was something I remember in the original series where they were talking about if a woman touched Thor's hammer, it would get bigger. And no joke. And somebody asked Gaiman about it. He said, I didn't make that up. That's actually in the original mythology. That actually is legit.
That's funny.
But what's kind of interesting to me, I mean, you heard me going on about this, how I absolutely loved the first episode of the show, because it really did kind of interrogate this whole concept of like what is motivating Loki to do, or motivating anybody to do what they do.
Right.
And I mean, I think a lot of it is Tom Hiddleston's performance, because he was fantastic. But you have that scene where the interrogation is basically like a therapy session. Yeah. And Owen Wilson's character is just sitting there basically saying, and what then? And what then? What happens when you get this? And what happens when you get that? And with Hiddleston kind of hitting that point of suddenly realizing that like his motivations to do these things, again, I should say like justification and motivation go hand in hand, where it's like, omelet, eggs. That's kind of his approach to, doing everything that he's done. But then when suddenly somebody breaks it down of going, ultimately this is kind of meaningless. I mean, that drawer with all the Infinity Gems.
Yeah.
That I love that image.
I saw a couple of YouTubers freaking out on this about this. They're like, "Oh my gosh, like you've just broken all the logic of the Marvel universe." And like, you're missing the point. You're so stuck on like these are supposed to be infinitely powerful. And like, what happens? What do you feel when everything you think is the most powerful point in the universe is pointless?
Exactly.
Where does that set you, right? It's like, it's not breaking continuity. It's not breaking things. It was like, and they're like, why isn't everybody worried? Anybody could just walk out of the TVA with those gems and jack up the universe. I'm like, that's why it's scary, because they don't care that you have infinity gems. They can still overrule you. Yep. Like, that's a freaky place to be.
Exactly. Because
that's stuff that we're going to talk about later when we talk about Loki. But the part of me that always gets me, and they play it up in the second Thor movie, and where they've had is that the one where they go to the Dark Elves? The second one, yeah. Yep. Second Thor movie, and then they replay what happens at the end of the second Thor movie, right? So when Mobius shows Loki like what happens, like this is what was supposed to happen, right? That Loki's ultimate drive is the ultimate drive. At the end of the day, this is where the Lacanian psychoanalyst comes out in me. But it's like Loki just wants to be wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, his drive, and ultimately to be wanted by his mom, right? Like that's the turning point for Loki in Loki's MCU arc, right? In his movie arcs, is like once his mom's down. Like, it's like, I've got to reconfigure, right?
Well, actually, I would agree with you, but I would even go a step further and say that it was his brother was the one that he really wanted the approval of. And I loved their relationship because, I mean, that's one of the best things about Thor Ragnarok is that it actually kind of explores this of even saying, you know, that you realize it's like, yeah, Loki really actually, he always wanted family. He always wanted to feel belonged.
Yep.
And I mean, of course, he had more of a connection with his mother because his mother was really the only one or at the time that made her love of him evident because, you know, that was
emotionally available, right? Thor.
There you go. That's a good way of
Thor
putting
wouldn't
it.
become emotionally unavailable until after his experiences on Midgard, right, on Earth. And which is why in the second movie he's able, I think, to move towards Loki in that way.
Mm-hmm.
That he couldn't before. So and Odin, of course, is even to Thor is, you know, emotionally distant and unavailable.
Yeah.
And so you get the one person in the whole universe who's given a damn, right? And that's in everything really is was just like, you know, if I can't be wanted, then I will be feared, right?
Yeah.
I will be cowered before. I will be kowtowed to, and then they will have to want me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's all just empty games. And that's what, you know, Mobius points out to him. It's like at the end of the day, what happens if you get it? Then what? Right. And in like Lacanian analysis, we call this chasing petit objet A, right? This little object A, this little tiny nugget of enjoyment that we never seem to quite know what it is that does it. So whenever we think we have it, we miss it. Right.
I'm laughing because just even hearing you say out loud, you know, little object A, I'm having like PTSD flashbacks to Green's class. Great professor, but you know, I will never forget. I still tell this story about how, you know, we go through, what was that? That was like a 4-hour class or something like that.
4 hours.
And then we hit the break time and then we come back. And then right before, you know, right when Kareem was saying, let's get back to work, I remember you saying, Oh, I'm so sorry, Brain.
The introduction to Lacan, it was brutal.
Oh, that class. I don't think I've ever been in another class that basically, I mean, I walked out feeling like my brain had just been to the gym and overexerted itself. I mean, that was just, oh, sorry. I had to interrupt because just when you said that, I just had a flashback.
I've spent the last 10 years in that, right? Like, I never left.
Yeah, you never left, so I feel bad because I'm the one who took off. But no, I mean you're right. You're right. I mean that's one of the things that
and ultimately that's Cruella
powerful about it,
right? I mean that's Cruella at the end, right? Is that she's chasing?
I wonder if they'll do that in the sequel, though.
I mean, you think there's going to be a Cruella sequel?
Well, I know there is.
Really?
They've already said that. But that would be interesting if they took that tack of like all of a sudden she has everything that she wanted.
Yeah, I've been wondering why Hell Manor, right, is in 101 Dalmatians is a complete wreck, right? They never explain why it's abandoned, etc., right, in the movie because it's like, oh, you just got everything. Now what? And that's always the question, right? And that's what makes good villains versus bad villains, right? Makes them 3-dimensional instead of 2. Mm-hmm. Is what do you do once you've gotten it, right? What do they do? Like, it's Megamind.
Remember that?
Yeah. Megamind's an example.
Truly underrated movie, but I loved what they did with that, where it was like the villain does conquer everything, and then what happens next, you know? Speaking of which, there's a book that I still can't believe they haven't made into a movie. I mean, Netflix should have bought the rights this long time ago. It was called Emperor Mollusk versus the Sinister Brain, and I loved it. And it is this basically, I mean, it's a book about a what is he? I mean, he's a mollusk type creature, and he's from, I believe it was from Mercury, and he takes over the planet Earth. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, what happens after that? And what's really amazing about it is the character is basically he's autistic, I mean, they don't say that in the book, but it's like
Mhm.
his way of thinking, and the whole story is told through his eyes. And so it's fascinating because to him, he doesn't even really register that. I mean, he registers that he's won the planet, but to him, it would be like you and I if we just finished our taxes.
Right.
He has no emotional involvement to it. And so there's this really fascinating edge to it where it's almost like he does get bored and he does have to go and keep going, but the fact that his emotions are taken out of the equation is what makes it so interesting. So he does some incredibly not vile, but some really amazing decisions that ultimately he knows they're going to have good ends. I don't want to spoil some stuff, but I guess I can't say much. But yeah, he does some incredibly horrible things, but because he knows it's going to have the desired outcome, he does it anyway.
Right.
So it would be kind of interesting just to see like how does motivation play a role in this, and that's why I'd be curious to see what they do with Cruella too. I really hope they don't drop the ball with it.
Well, I'm not holding my breath.
I know. I mean, the fact that they got the director, the guy who did the Fright Night remake, which is another great example of feminist writing that was done very, very well.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. I really liked the Fright Night remake. I thought it was really damn good. I really liked the way that they handled the female characters in that one. Plus, you have David Tennant. I think that was the first thing I ever saw David Tennant in. I don't think I was watching Doctor Who before that. And I remember watching the movie, and at first, when he first came on, I'm like, oh God, I'm going to hate this character. And then about 10 minutes later, it's like, oh God, I love this character. I mean, he stole the whole movie.
And then man, it ruins it when he's the purple man in Jessica Jones. I was like, no, stop.
Oh,
stop doing that.
Yeah.
Like,
I could think of some inappropriate jokes to go with that, but yeah, that was like, no, stop that. It's like, no. David Tennant is awesome. I mean, I do love that he has a new TV show on the BBC, which he has been doing with Michael Sheen, who those two are like the perfect gay couple, except they're both heterosexual married men. But it's like their chemistry is incredible. But they did this whole show where they're basically, it's all done, like Zoom call type thing, where they're supposed to be performing in this play together, and it's that kind of subtle, that subtle British frenemy, one person trying to one up the other one, and now I almost wonder if we're going to start talking about Good Omens, but yeah. But to go back to what you were talking about, what happens when their motivation, their primary motivation, like what it is that they're moving towards, what happens when that is satisfied? Well, I was going to say taken away, but no, if it was taken away, that would just be even more motivating. So that's one of the fascinating things about the Loki show is when you suddenly he has this epiphany, or it's basically presented to him of realizing that everything he has worked for, like his orientation towards it, and his orientation is so strong and his motivation is so strong that he's willing to kill in order to get to it, and then to suddenly have that the rug pulled out from under him. What happens next? Like, what is his motivation in his actions? Yep. Yeah.
Well, closing thoughts?
Well, I do think it's interesting that when we put out our survey, so far everybody wants us to do Loki over Cruella. I mean, we're going to do both. There's no two ways about that, I do think it will be very interesting, perhaps, to see them as being two sides of the same coin here, because in a way, both are looking at evil, but they're looking at it in a different way of saying, like, what is it that motivates a person to commit these acts? What is the justification behind it? And then going back to the original thing of saying, well, it's never nature or nurture, but like which aspect?
Right. Both had a chance to be good. Both were taken out of the bad place that they were born into, only to have the bad kind of sneak back up on them. Which way, right? But did they have a choice, right? And we get into questions of agency and determinacy, which I'm sure we'll work out in the episodes.
Well, considering that's usually the only things you and I ever talk about, yeah, I'd say so.
So we'd love to know your thoughts in the comments about what you think about the nature of evil. What ideas have come to you as you've listened to us talk about this? Let us know down below. And as always, please consider subscribing to the channel.
Yes, and please make sure to, if you subscribe, to hit the little bell so that you will get the notifications, because YouTube has a bizarre notification system on there. Also, if you like our stuff and you want us to see more, please consider, just hit the like button if you like it, and make sure to leave a comment, if you will, because again, it's one of those bizarre things where it's not enough to like it. There has to be a comment in order for it to gain traction anywhere. So we would greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, and feel free to please continue these conversations on our subreddit, which you'll also find a link in the description, which we have, and on our Facebook page.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ron.
Until next time.